Building a fire is simple in principle, but it's not always easy to do. Today, we're going to talk about how to do it consistently and successfully every time. Hey, everybody, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. I was on a hunt recently in northeastern Washington, and we were camping for a couple of days. And the area that we camped in was right next to a stream, sort of in the shadow of a hill on the other side of the road. So what we ended up with was this very humid, sort of cold area. And it was nice because there was a fire ring and good flat places to pitch our tents. But once the sun went down, it would get cold quickly. And because we were right next to the stream, everything would have a little frost on it. And there was a lot of moisture. So maybe we should have chosen a better place to camp. It was our first time out there and we didn't know the area that well. So it was what it was. But it did make building a fire somewhat challenging. So we would be out hunting until sundown, and then we would come back to camp. It would only be, 5:30 when we got back to camp, though, because the sun goes down so early this time of year. And we would want to build a fire because we had a couple hours before we would get tired. So we would start to gather some twigs and sticks, but everything would have a little bit of moisture on it. And although we had some paper to start the fire with, everything else took a long time to catch. So while I was building these fires, I was just reminded of how challenging it can be sometimes. And if you're not someone who's made many fires in the past, it could be a really frustrating process. For myself, I've probably made hundreds of fires. And so I kind of have an expectation or an understanding of how challenging it's going to be given the materials that I have to start it with. And there were a couple times where I sort of lit these fires on the camping trip prematurely. I was just thinking maybe it will catch, maybe it won't. What I really should have done is taken more time to prepare. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All the things that go into making a fire successfully. We'll talk about the 3 things that fire needs. We'll talk about starting and building the fire from collecting wood to putting it out. And then we'll talk about starting fires when it's wet. So we should cover the whole spectrum of fire starting and building. And hopefully it will be helpful for you on your next adventure. Before we get further into it, please take a moment to follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen on, leave a review, leave a comment, and even share an episode with a friend. All of these things will help the podcast grow and in turn help more people get outside and into hunting, which is what Persistence Outdoors is all about. So thank you to everybody who supports the podcast. Thank you to everybody who has given me ideas for these episodes. That's really helpful. I love hearing what you guys want to learn about. If you ever have an idea, feel free to drop it in a comment or shoot me an email at persistenceoutdoors2022@gmail.com. And I will take that into consideration and maybe we'll make a podcast out of it. So thank you once again for supporting the podcast. It's been wonderful to watch it grow, and together we'll continue to help more people get outside hunting. Before you start building your fire or even collecting wood, you need to understand what a fire needs. So there's 3 things that a fire has to have to exist. The first is heat, the second is fuel, and the third is oxygen. It's hard to say whether it's the chicken or the egg, but without one of these 3 things, fire will not exist. So heat. Heat is important because obviously you need something hot enough to create a flame. and the fuel needs to get hot enough that it can catch a flame and burn. When you're building a fire, though, you want to think about building it structurally in a way that helps contain some heat. So you may have cooked over a fire before, and you know that once you have those hot coals, you can keep some heat going in the fire and even catch a flame again if you want to. And when you're thinking about how to build a fire, you want to think about, where are those hot coals going to be? How do I contain this heat in sort of a centralized area that will then allow other pieces of fuel to catch flame and continue to burn? That could be up against a rock. That could be in between a couple larger pieces of wood. Whatever it is, just keep that in mind, that you're trying to create and contain some heat. The next thing is fuel. When we're camping and hunting, fuel is most likely going to be wood. Now, there's different types of fuel. There's tinder, there's kindling, and then there's just firewood. We'll talk about those more in a minute. You can also have fuel like gasoline or white gas or lighter fluid. There's all sorts of different fuels. And I think this is the one that most people are familiar with. Most people know that paper is going to burn, that wood is going to burn, and it's pretty intuitive. The third one is oxygen. Fire needs oxygen to break down the fuel. It's literally oxidation. And this is one thing that can get a lot of new fire building people, fire starters. I don't know what you call them. But when you're new to this, you may just throw a bunch of fuel onto your small flame and expect that it's going to catch on. But really, you can smother the fire. So you have to think about, again, when you're building the fire, you have to think about allowing airflow. You have to think about the structure of the fire so that airflow and oxygen can get to the flame and help the fire continue to burn. So always keep those three things in mind. If you have those three things available for your fire, you will be able to use a variety of different fuels. You can build fire in different ways. You can use different fire starters, and you'll still be successful. Let's go through the process of starting and building a fire. The first thing you need to do is choose the right location. When it comes to building fires, preparation is everything. You could have all the right materials, you could have the perfect fire starter, whatever, and if you didn't prepare correctly, your fire might go out. Now, obviously, if you have gasoline and logs, you're going to be good to go. But I'm saying if you are working with the things that you might find in the backcountry or the things that you might have with you camping, you need to prepare to have a successful fire. So choose a location that, first of all, is safe. You don't want to burn people, tents. You don't want to burn the surrounding forest, right? So make sure that it's a safe location. If possible, a sheltered location is really helpful. This might mean sheltered from the wind. This might mean sheltered from the rain. You do want to make sure that you're not just building a fire under a tree that has snow on it, because then snow could fall on your fire and put it out. So just take into consideration the position of where you're going to build your fire before you do that. And then also, it helps to build a fire on dry ground. Obviously, if you build a fire in a place that's going to collect a lot of water, it's going to stifle the flow of oxygen and put your fire out. So finding the correct location is going to set you up for success. The next step is to collect and stage your fuel. There's three types of fuel, right? There's tinder, there's kindling, and there's firewood. And then maybe a fourth type is lighter fluid or something like that. But for our purposes, we're going to talk about the three types. So tinder is your finest and most easily flammable fuel. So this could be paper, this could be lint that you collect from your dryer, this could be dry pine needles, this could be tiny, tiny, tiny twigs, this could be shavings from a stick or shavings of magnesium from a magnesium fire starter. All sorts of things can be used as tinder. but it needs to be fine, and once you light it, it should catch a flame immediately. It's important that your tinder is dry. All fuel needs to be dry, but that first moment when you light the tinder is critical, and so you need it to be as dry and receptive to a flame as possible. Next is kindling. Kindling is going to be small sticks, maybe a half inch around or less than an inch around. And this could be a piece of firewood cut up into small sticks. It could be just small sticks that you find. Kindling is what you use once you've got your tinder and all your twigs burning, and you start to build up the flame. And as the kindling burns, you start to get some coals, and it allows you to then burn larger pieces of wood. Once your kindling is burning, then you can add on your firewood. And this is large sticks and logs. Pretty simple. As long as it's somewhat dry and you have enough heat and flame from your fire, even large pieces of wood are going to burn. When you're collecting fuel, you should always collect more than you think you'll need. And this is especially true of tinder and kindling. Tinder is going to burn very quickly, and kindling is going to burn quickly as well. So you're going to need large amounts of it to continue the heat and flame necessary for the other firewood to catch on. And if you don't have enough, what's going to happen is you're going to light your fire, you're going to burn your tinder, it's going to burn out, and then you're going to have to go collect more. And you're going to waste a whole lot of tinder before you can catch any kindling on. And then if you don't have enough kindling, the same thing's going to happen. So do yourself a favor and just collect as much tinder as you think you'll need and then some, so you'll only have to light the fire once. The next thing to do is sort out your fuel. You'll need to have your tinder and kindling close at hand for the next few steps. Once again, if you light your tinder and then your kindling is across your camp and you have to go run for it and you come back, your tinder is going to be burned out and you're going to have to do the whole thing again. So make sure it's close at hand so you can just grab stuff and put it on the fire. The third step is to create your structure. So this could take many different forms. The two structures that I recommend are the log cabin structure or the lean-to structure. When I'm building a fire, these are the ones that I use the most. There's other structures like the teepee structure that you'll see in a lot of movies and art and things like that, but I don't find it to be that useful in real life scenarios. You may also see like the upside down fire structure, the self-feeding structure. All of these can be useful and they have a time and a place, but for the vast majority of building fires, I'm starting it with a log cabin or a lean-to. So a log cabin is just what it sounds like. You take two larger pieces of wood, or you can start it with kindling, but often two larger pieces of wood help sort of define where the fire is going to burn. So you put those down, and then across those two larger pieces of wood, you can put additional pieces of wood, like a tic-tac-toe board. And that allows you to then put tinder and kindling in the middle. And as it grows, it will catch onto the larger pieces of wood on the outside. With a lean-to, you take either a large piece of wood or even a rock, some other piece of structure, and you just lean your kindling and later your firewood from the ground across to your log or your rock or whatever you're making the lean-to against. So you will put the tinder, your little ball of tinder, right up next to whatever you're using for the side of your lean-to, and then you lean other pieces of wood or kindling across to that. And once you light that tinder and it gets going, then it should reach those other pieces of kindling and wood as the fire grows. So these are two super simple structures. I think having those big pieces of wood or something to lean the fire against helps maintain some heat and helps make it so that everything burns kind of in the same area. And that's going to be helpful to continue the fire as it progresses. This is different than just putting everything in a pile. And once it burns, it kind of falls away and scatters. And then you're losing a lot of heat, and it's harder for the other pieces of wood to catch fire and burn. So I've mentioned a couple times having a ball of tinder. You can take your paper and you can crunch it up into balls. You can make a little nest with twigs and pine needles or dry grasses or lint or whatever you've got. And you just want to take this nest or ball of tinder and put it in the middle of where you want your fire to be. This ball of tinder is very important. This is going to catch your flame, and there needs to be enough tinder that once it catches a flame, it can burn long enough to catch your other twigs and even kindling that you have over the fire. So you've got to make sure you have enough. And also, if you're using something besides a lighter or a match, maybe you're using a ferro rod that makes sparks, you want it to be shaped in a way that it can catch a spark and the spark can fall down into the tinder and light it up. With a lighter or a match, you just hold it under your tinder and usually it will catch a flame. But with those sparking devices, you have to be really intentional about how you shape your tinder so that it can catch a spark instead of the sparks just falling onto the cold ground and dying out. One tip at this stage is to not build your structure so big at first. So you could build a log cabin and you could use big pieces of wood and you could build it quite high, and you might look at it and think, great, once the flame catches, it's going to climb its way all the way up this log cabin and I'm going to have an awesome fire. But more likely than not, you're going to have to feed your fire small twigs and sticks as you're helping the flame grow. And so then you're just going to have to knock down your log cabin and start over again. Or maybe you're using the lean-to structure and you just put too much stuff on top of that fire. And you think more fuel, more flame, right? But in reality, what's going to happen is that you're going to smother that tiny little flame that you've started. So just keep it small, keep it close to the ground. You want all your kindling and tinder that you're trying to catch a flame on, you want that very close to that original flame. And so it's better to start small and build than it is to have just a giant structure in place from the get-go. Now, if you're building a campfire and you're car camping and you have dry wood and you have lighter fluid and you have paper, whatever, do whatever you want. It's going to be easy to light that fire. But if you're out in the backcountry and you're just using wood and fuel that you've scrounged up, take your time and build from a small flame up to a full-blown campfire. All right, the next step is to light your fire. So you are going to use whatever type of fire starter you have, and you're going to light the tinder. And the tinder should catch flame pretty quickly, and it's going to burn out pretty quickly as well. So you need to start feeding it with small twigs and even more tinder if you have it on hand. So start with twigs smaller than the diameter of a pencil. Really tiny little twigs, just enough to start getting some wood burning. And you might just place 1 or 2 twigs over that tiny flame. And if they're dry enough and there's enough heat, those twigs are going to catch fire. And then as the flame grows, you can start to put larger and larger pieces of wood on. So you've got those twigs smaller than the diameter of a pencil, and then you're going to use twigs about the diameter of a pencil. And then once you've got some of those burning, you can put some small kindling on, maybe stuff the diameter of your thumb, and you just work your way up as the flame grows and as the heat builds. This part is really all about feeding the fire, and it's going to be involved for maybe 5 to 10 minutes as you just slowly build up that flame. And again, it goes back to the idea of not overbuilding your fire first starting out. If you're using natural materials, especially, you're just going to be squatting by your fire, grabbing stuff from your sorted fuel and putting it on and helping that flame get to a point where it can sustain itself on its own. This is the most fun and most frustrating part of building a fire. You'll find out if you prepared enough and if you had enough tinder. If you're using materials that are kind of wet to build the fire, it can be really hard to get that flame to grow enough. You will accidentally smother the fire sometimes and then have to pull stuff off. You'll spend a lot of time blowing on the fire, trying to get some oxygen flow in there. And it's very satisfying once you get that flame large enough to be able to just keep burning on its own. But this is also the time when you're most often going to fail and then have to collect more tinder and start over again. So enjoy the process and remember that whether you're successful here or not depends on how well you prepared before lighting the fire. Once you've progressed from tinder and small twigs to kindling, and you've got some sticks maybe half an inch in diameter burning, usually you're in the clear. At this point, the fire has got some heat building. You may be getting some small coals, and you can likely put on some actual firewood that's going to take longer to burn and also continue to build heat and coals. So at this point, continue building your structure, whether it's a lean-to or a log cabin or something else. Add some firewood on. If it's going great guns, add some logs on, and you can really start to feel the heat and enjoy your fire. Now, once you've got logs on the fire is going to be much more stable, but you still need to think about having enough fuel. So if you need to cut more logs, you should do that. If you've got some wood that's kind of wet, but you want to dry it out, now is a good time to do that. You can put it close to the fire, and at least one side of that wood is going to start to steam a little bit and dry out. And that way you will have dry fuel as the fire continues to burn. The final step when building a fire is to put it out. If you're in a wilderness area or even in a campsite, it's dangerous to have a fire that's unattended and still burning. So you need to think of a way to put it out. You can start by scattering the fire a little bit, and then it will lose heat and it won't have the fuel it needs to continue burning. You can pour water on it. A lot of campsites will have a bucket nearby, or at least some sort of spigot, and you can get some water and pour it on there. If you don't have water, maybe you're in the backcountry, start by scattering it and then try and put some dirt on it. Of course, if you have time, you can just wait and let it burn down to nothing, and eventually it will go out. But you do want to be careful to not leave a fire burning without supervision. There's just too many instances of wildfires that sweep through forests and destroy people's property, and you don't want to be the person who starts that. So that's a pretty good overview on how to start and build a fire. Let's talk a little bit about building a fire when it's cold and wet. So once again, starting the fire is the hardest part. When you've got a fire going, you can burn some wet stuff. If it's excessively wet, it's going to be very challenging. But once you've got a flame going, you can dry things out and catch even slightly damp or slightly green wood. So starting the fire is the hardest part. And once again, you need to over prepare. You need to get more tinder than you think you need. You need to get more kindling and even more firewood than you think you need. And doing this up front is going to save you lots of frustration and actually be much more efficient than trying to start a fire multiple times. Now, finding dry tinder can be very challenging in wet conditions. So the best way, in my opinion, is to just bring tinder from home. Bring dryer lint. You can take lint from your catch in your dryer, and you can get tons of that and stuff it into a bag and it will be very lightweight. You'll hardly notice you have it in your pack, and that stuff burns super well. So get some dryer lint. If you've got some paper, that works as well. You can make homemade fire starters where you take dryer lint and wax and you put those in a little piece of cardboard egg carton, and that lint and wax together will burn a lot longer than just lint alone. It's kind of like a little candle. You can also bring candles. Candles can be super helpful to give you just a sustained flame while you try to build the rest of the fire around it. So, if you know you're going to be hunting in wet conditions, bring some tinder and keep it dry. I think that's the best way to do it, and it will give you the most chances for success. Now, if you find yourself in wet conditions and you don't have tinder that you've brought from home, you're going to have your work cut out for you searching for dry tinder. So some places that you might find dry tinder or dry wood would be on the sheltered underside of fallen trees. It could rain a lot, but still there could be a dry pocket on the underside of those trees. And you might find some dry pine needles or small twigs under there that you can use to start your fire. You may also need to dry out some tinder. So maybe you are hunting and you see something like old man's beard or some other moss or lichen, and it's all feathery. It kind of looks like the right consistency for tinder, but it's a little damp. You could grab some of that and put it in your pocket or put it close to your body somehow to start helping that dry out. And then later in the day, use that as tinder. Another way to get some tinder if you're really in a pinch is to take a stick or a twig and you can shave off small pieces of wood into a pile. And then you'll have this little pile of shavings. And you can use that as tinder as well. This might work for wet environments. If you can find something that's dry on the inside, even if it's wet on the outside, you can cut that away and then get dry shavings. Now, it's hard to catch a spark on shavings, but if you have a lighter or even matches, you might be good to go. So those are all some things to think about for getting tinder in wet conditions. Honestly, though, I would just bring it from home. I would never be caught without some tinder when I'm out hunting, and I think you should make it a priority for yourself as well. Your location for your fire, like we talked about earlier, is much more important when it's wet. When it's dry, you could build a fire all sorts of places as long as it's safe. But when it's wet, you're looking for a place that's sheltered. You're maybe looking for a place where you can keep wood nearby, but keep it dry. So if you've got a tarp or something, you can just throw that over your fuel. If you don't have that with you, you might go to a place that's got a little bit more of a tree canopy. And oftentimes you wouldn't want to build a fire next to a tree, right? Because then you risk catching it. But if you're in a wet place and you have healthy trees, they're likely not going to catch that easily. And so using the shelter from some trees can help you actually build a fire, keep more of the rain off, keep it a little bit drier. And since it's raining already, you don't really have to worry too much about accidentally starting a wildfire. One last thing that is going to be helpful in wet conditions is a more robust lighter. So using your normal strike anywhere matches in the rain might not be very successful. But if you have something like a Zippo lighter that holds a flame really well, something like a small little blowtorch, weatherproof matches, which are just kind of matches that have much more flammable material on them and burn very well, even in wet conditions. Something like this is going to help you catch that first flame much easier than using something like a ferro rod or even just your normal strike anywhere matches. So once again, it comes back to preparation. If you know you're going to be out in wet conditions, make sure to bring the right tools. All right, the last thing I want to say about building a fire is that you need to practice. Like I said in the intro, the principle is pretty simple. As long as you have heat, fuel, and oxygen, you can build a fire. But when it comes down to using the different types of fuel and even finding the fuel in the first place and choosing a place for your fire, all of those things you can get better at by practicing. So the good thing is building fires is fun. And so do you really need an excuse to go out and build a fire? Not really. Just go do it. And the more and more you do it, the better you're going to get. I think practice is also important for your specific area. So the fuel that you will have available in a coniferous forest in a mountainous area is going to be completely different than the fuel you'll have available in a deciduous forest, right? So if you go out and practice in the actual conditions that you'll be in the actual types of places that you will be in, you'll get better at dealing with your scenarios. You'll know what type of fuels to look out for, and it will make it easier for when you actually need to build a fire to stay warm or to cook or even survive when you're hunting. Now, before we wrap up, we're going to take a quick detour and talk about stoves. When should you use a stove instead of a fire? In some places, the most obvious one is that in some places, fires are going to be illegal. So this could be a state park where they have so many visitors making fires that it becomes a burden on the natural resources. It could be during certain times of year when the overnight humidity is very low and the chances of forest fires increase. It could be in areas that are regulated for leave no trace, and they just want people to use stoves instead of making fires and having coals and blackened wood around. So whatever the case, do check the area that you're going into and make sure that fires are legal before you build one. And if they're illegal, you're going to have to use a stove. Another time you might need to use a stove instead of a fire is if you're going into the alpine. So this could be extreme hunts. This could be mountaineering. If you're getting high enough, there may not be the fuel you need to build a fire successfully. And so then you need to be prepared and have a stove. And then finally, when I'm hunting and camping, I often just don't want to go to the trouble of building a fire, especially on a hunt like a spring bear hunt. It's light for 12 hours a day. I'm trying to hunt in the evenings, in the mornings especially, and I just want to be able to warm up my food and eat while I'm glassing. I don't want to have to build a fire. I don't want to build a fire when it's dark because I just want to sleep at that point. And so the whole trouble of building a fire, I just don't want to deal with. And I'd rather use a stove. It's also easier to make many types of camping food on a stove than it is to make on a fire. So anything that involves a pot is going to be easier on a stove. You can cook with pots over a fire, but you're likely going to blacken the underside of that pot, and you don't have a lot of heat control. And so there's times when a stove is just going to be easier than a fire. When I do like a fire, though, is when there's long fall or winter nights, when there's lots of people around and we just want to hang out and talk for a while, or when we're trying to make food that is really complemented by fire. So maybe you're successful on a hunt and you want to cook some food over a fire, or maybe you're making burgers, something like that. Then you'll want a fire, and I think it's worth the effort. If you do realize that you'd prefer a stove over a fire and you want to learn a little bit more about stoves, go check out episode 42, Stoves for Hunting and Camping. I go pretty in-depth on the different types of stoves that are available and the pros and cons of each. So I know a lot of people have found that episode to be very helpful, and it kind of goes hand in hand with our topic for today. All right, guys, I think that's it for today. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at persistenceoutdoors2022@gmail.com or drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube, and I will be happy to answer those. In the meantime, keep your Tinder dry, and I will catch you on the next one.